Yeah. First off, just want to thank all the subscribers. Appreciate you guys. Much love. So today I want to talk about the language of violence. And I know I brought this up many times before, but I really want to, dig into it today. And what I mean about the language of violence is I mean the way we use violence to communicate, right? And it comes, for a lot of us growing up, this is something that we dealt with regularly. Now, it's no excuse, but just a little background on how I grew up and how violence was communicated to me. So at a young age, the way I was disciplined was through violence. You know, my mama beat the shit out of me. Bang, 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 fucked up. That you learn not to do that shit again, right? So that's again no excuse for how I acted, but that was something that was, regular, a regular occurrence for me. And also, I grew up in a home where domestic violence was very common. What happened maybe every other weekend, sometimes a few times a month. My jefita and my jefito would just be like, going at it and shit. It's crazy because it seems like if things went too well for too long, well, you braced yourself. That's how I did. I braced myself like, oh shit, things are going too well. Something bad's going to happen. It's kind of like that trauma really got to me. And I be like, I'll talk about that shit later though, because I know there are a lot of people like that where you wait for the bad things to come because there's too many. It's been too good, too calm, too stable, too long. So, so you had that, right? So that was in the home. Outside of the home, when about I'd say 7, 8, 9, 10 years old for a lot of people, especially growing up in like a street environment, you have to fight a lot, and it's not just gangsters or cholos or anything like that. Like it's regular kids too. You after school, meet me after school, fight. There's a lot of that. That's the way it's something that's very common for kids to do is fight, right? They're trying to assert who they are and all that shit. So from a young age, I learned that the more willing of a participant you are to engage in violence, the more you'll be looked upon with like you'll be looked upon as somebody who's kind of a solid guy, right? That guy's good. He's down for his shit. I remember as a kid, that's what that was down for his shit. He's down for his shit. I remember a lot of people saying that as kids and shit. So I grew up understanding that violence was essential to my survival at that point, right? And I didn't fit in with a lot of people. I didn't fit in with the jocks, and I was about average intelligence, so I wasn't spectacular in the classroom. There wasn't anywhere where I shined or excelled. But I did notice the older I got, I'd say to my pre-teens and early teenage years, the more violence I committed, then the more praise I received, and the more acceptance I received. I found that violence was a way for me to be accepted. People would embrace you. That's a down little homie right there. Hey, that motherfucker's with the business, dog. That's the homie right there, right? You hear that about a lot of people. And a lot of it is because they're not only willing to engage in violence, but willing to initiate violence. They don't let anything slide. Something happens, pink, they're taking flight, right? It's a lot of people. And that's the way, like, a lot of cats, they conduct themselves, right? Like I'm not going to let anything slide. And it's a trip because that's the difference between people who, when you're growing up, who are like, oh, he's down for his shit. Like, he'll get down. And then a homie that's just a down-ass fucking crazy motherfucker. The down-ass crazy motherfuckers, like, that aren't just fighting to handle their business, but they're initiating the shit, they usually end up getting busted and locked up and shit. And when you're getting locked up, you're getting locked up with other cats that are just like you. Other cats that are willing to do the same shit. So when you get locked up with them, you see that the violence escalates, right? It's not only are there people who are willing to fight, but then you see there's people who are willing to slice. I'll slice anybody up. I don't give a fuck. See people willing to stab. I'll book anybody. I don't give a fuck. And it goes further and further. And then that's the same case on the streets, right? It's like from fighting to stabbing to shooting. It's just the violence escalates. And the more the violence escalates, the bigger the reputation gets. I remember being in YA, hearing stories, and I'm not gonna tell the homies' names because it's their stories to tell. But there was two stories I heard that I was just tripping out because those homies had been gone for years, and they were like, "Oh, you from Florida? I know your homeboy this, I know your homeboy that, right?" They told a story about a homie who was shackled up. He was shackled up, and they had him in a van. He was leaving either YTS or Dallas, I forgot where, but he was in the van going on a long ass trip, and he came out the cuffs and started slicing two people up in the van. They had him sitting next to two people he shouldn't have been sitting next to, right? I started fucking them up and slicing them up. And I was like, at the time, I was like, damn, that's fucking crazy. And it pumps you up, right? People are telling stories about him, about his violence that happened years later, right? I mean, years before. Another story about two homies, I think they were in Chad. Door had racked. They booked somebody and tried to throw him over the tier and shit. And they're telling me these stories years after they occurred. Right? And I'm pumped up like, oh, hell yeah, that's the shit. Like, that violence gets like, it's communicated that these vatos were not to be fucked with. These were cats that did their thing, and their status still lives on, right? So that's what we learned growing up. We embrace the violence. We look forward to it. We want our names remembered. But the thing that only works in the street community. You can't act like that as a normal civilian, right? Because in the streets, there's different levels to violence too. Right? If somebody fucks up, but that's your boy, but you want to check them, there's a certain way you're gonna jump them, or there's a certain way you're gonna get down with them. If there's a disagreement between you and somebody who you respect, there's a certain way you're gonna get down with them. You're not gonna fight them the same way you'd fight an enemiga, or you'd fight somebody who wishes to do harm on you. There's a certain way you're going to communicate this violence. It's not all the same. There's levels to this violence, and you know how to use it based on the situation. Again, that's the language of violence. That language isn't something you could take to the corporate world or to even to a blue collar world. You can't be in a fucking factory getting down with your fucking with your manager, your supervisor. You can't do that shit, right? So you learned that a lot of these people, a lot of these homies and homegirls who are getting down for theirs, who are initiating this shit, have a lot of trauma that they haven't dealt with. And they're communicating this violence because they don't know any other way. And I think it's the hardest thing to break. It's harder than drugs, harder than anything else out there. The hardest thing to get rid of is the violence. Because I've even seen people who changed. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm a changed man, but you come at me the wrong way or do something, I'm still willing to do that. I'm still like, because that violence is still in the back of their mind, that they feel that they still, if needed, they can use, they can speak that language, right? That's still a language you could speak. Now, me, I'm putting it out there right now. I wish and I hope, and I'm gonna make it my goal for the rest of my life to never fight on the streets. I don't want to fight on the fucking streets. Like, that's not what I want to do. And why? Because I don't want to speak the language of violence, but also I'm a father. I want to speak and I want to conduct myself how a husband and father would conduct themselves. I have grown ass kids, right? I have adult kids. I don't want them seeing me fighting in the streets. I wouldn't want that shit, right? I want to conduct myself as a mature individual. So that's why it's hard to change, though, because there were times where, again, I committed violence and I got the praise and recognition. That's right, homie. Even my family, that's right, ball, man. You handled that shit. It makes you feel good. But there comes a point where you need a change, and it's uncomfortable at times. It's definitely uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Necessary for growth. But yeah, that's all I got today. Hope everyone has a good day. Much love to the Nasty Crew. Much love to my YA babies. And with that, we out. Peace.